This is going to be a throwback black and white video. So I've been doing some reading, and then I got some more books that I ordered off Amazon. So just go over them a little. So the first book I finished this year is called Incel by Mina Loy. And it was a novel that was written in the 1930s, but it wasn't published until I think the 90s. And it's from the perspective of someone very similar to Mina Loy, if not actually her. And it's an observation of another character in the book named Incel, but in real life he was a German painter, German surrealist painter. And it's kind of like a character study. It's very similar to Nightwood by Juna Barnes. It's very similar in the language, like how it's like very like ornate Baroque styling. She does really interesting stuff with words. I was planning on reading some of it from my Kindle, but I neglected to bring it in here. I didn't plan this video. But yeah, I would recommend checking it out. I think it was published by Black Sparrow Press, and then I think maybe Melville House published it recently again. But it's also available online, and it's only about 200 pages, so I'd recommend it. I'd highly recommend it. It's a very good book. And then the other book I read, which I was pretty disappointed in, was Hill William by Scott McClanahan. And this book was published by Tyrant Books, which is the same people who publish Atticus Lish, Preparation for the Next Life, which is a book that I enjoyed quite a lot when I read it. So I was kind of going off that, and also this guy has interviews online. Scott McClanahan does, where it's pretty funny. But in the interview, he basically goes through this book. It's like a 25-minute interview or something, and he hits like all the points this book hits, so you can tell. And he's talking about his life in that interview, unless he's doing like some sophisticated ruse. So you can tell that this book is very autobiographical. But I have to say, I really didn't like this book at all. And the reasons I didn't like it, it has a very plain style. Like, it's as if you're trying to write a story as like a 12-year-old, and you cut out any repetition, like, naive repetition. So you kind of plan it that way, but it's really, which it kind of makes sense, because this is a book, a lot of it takes place when the guy's young, but I think it was detrimental to make it so, it's basically like if a 12-year-old was writing. It's not from the perspective of a 12-year-old. It's as if, someone who wasn't very good at writing was writing, which may have been a conscious choice, but I don't like it. And then another thing I don't like is that it focuses so much on, like, there's like an extended scene where there's like a poop streak on a towel after a baptism, and he like tries to hide it and all this stuff. It really reminds me of Ben Lerner leaving Atocha Station, which I also did not like at all, because in that book, a ton of the focus is on the main character's reliance on medications for anxiety or for like, mental instability. And I don't know what it is about these contemporary books that focus so much on that, but I don't like it. But then I try to like say, well, Dostoevsky does a very similar thing in Notes from the Underground, but I don't know, I guess the way he does it is way better, because these contemporary authors like Ben Lerner and Scott McClanahan, I just can't stand it. And I think someone compared this guy to Bukowski, and I have really no interest in Bukowski. But yeah, I suppose if you like Bukowski, you probably like this guy. But if you like the books I do, you won't like him, most likely. But those are the two books I've read starting this year. And with my Christmas money and just other stuff I've been earning, sold some books. I got, let's see, 4, 7, 8 books in the mail. And some of them are pretty interesting. I'll just start randomly. So the first one here is the Book of Portraiture by Steve Tomasula. Oh. And this was published by Fiction Collective 2. You should be able to find it pretty cheaply also. But on the back it says it's a postmodern epic in writing and images. But where I found it was on this Instagram page, Ashakoda or something like that. They read a ridiculous amount of books each month, but I think this book was one of their top of the year. And that's where I first was introduced to it, and then I looked more into it. It seemed interesting, so I ended up getting it, and I've read the beginning of it. Seems like what I would like. Starts in prehistoric times, continues through the present, so yep, I think that's going to be a good book for me. Next is The Cubical City by Janet Flanner, and I found this from this Lost American Fiction series, which is the same one that publishes Yesterday's Burdens by Robert M. Coates. And on the back of that book, this book was mentioned, that they were in the same group of friends in Paris in the 20s. So I thought this book would be neat because really a lot of the modernist books, the modernist city books, are basically all male, written by men. There's really only Virginia Woolf. I think Miss Dalloway is somewhat like that, but a lot of her books are more in the countryside, it seems to me, or at least I guess you could say domestic rather than walking around in a city. But yeah, also I think Janet Flanner was, I believe she was lesbian, so that'll be neat to get that mindset of the time. And this is the book I just started tonight after I finished those others, A Heart So White by Javier Marias. And I first heard of this one from Paperbird's really good review of it, or video online, but then I recently talked to somebody and they highly recommended it as a contemporary author who's good, so decided to get it. I've been wanting to read him for a while, but I've been really wanting to read his long series, Your Face Tomorrow, but every copy I find of the first volume is defiled by, some stupid person who ended up selling it. So I never bought it. And then, I just decided to get this book because a lot of people consider it his really good book or his best. But I'm enjoying it so far, only about 15 pages in or so, but I'm really enjoying it. Next is Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James Agee. And this project originally started by, I think, a New York newspaper. Oh no, Fortune Magazine. Fortune Magazine, an assignment to go to the South and try to find a representative Southern family and explore the daily lives of the family and report back. But him and Walker Evans, that famous Depression-era photographer, they went down and James Agee was writing it. And then it eventually wasn't published in the magazine, but they compiled enough for a fairly long book. And kind of going along with my just general interest in modernist stuff, I have been really trying to focus on different parts of the world, like what it was like in the 1930s and late 20s, 30s. And I've had pretty good luck so far. I have Japan, China, at least small sections, but Japan, China, almost the whole US, Brazil, Argentina, almost all of Europe. And I recently got this book, it should be arriving in the mail tomorrow, called Phantom Africa by Michel Leiris. And that's a book, it was a travel log journal written in early 1930s, 1931 to 33, I believe, where they went on an expedition. He's French, and he was friends with Bataille and all these guys, and they went from Dakar, which is in Western Africa, to Djibouti, which is in Eastern Africa by Ethiopia, and it took them 2 years to do it. And he was the, I think, like scribe or something like that, whatever you call it, secretary. But then he also took this informal journal that he sent back in letters to his wife, and it's compiled, and it was just recently translated and published by Siegel Books, which is a very interesting publisher that you should keep an eye on if you haven't heard of them, because they do a lot of interesting stuff. They're originally based in India, but they're distributed worldwide by, I think, University of Chicago Press, and that's a pretty good press on its own. But yeah, I should have that one coming in the mail tomorrow. It's 700 something pages of a travel log in Africa in the 1930s, so that should be pretty cool. Next is Bellarmino and Apolonio by Ramon Perez de Ayala. This is a Spanish author, published in 1921. It seems to come from the same pathway or literary tradition as Don Quixote, which it mentions on the back. So it says, a sprightly, even colloquial translation of a Spanish classic published in 1921, which, like Don Quixote, to which it is sometimes compared, gives the reader more pleasure in the manner of its telling than in its flimsy story. The narrative is interspersed liberally with comments on everything from religion to food to art. A very entertaining satire on man, the lovable ass. And also you can find pretty cheap editions of it, paperback. I think this one was only like $4 or something. You can also probably find hardcovers pretty easily too, which is weird because it seems like a very good book from its time. A lot of these books I haven't read yet. I just got them in the mail the last couple days. They came from my post-Christmas batch of ordering. Another one I got today, which I'm really happy about actually, that I got it for such a good price, is The Complete Works and Letters of Charles Lamb. So if you can see that. And Charles Lamb, I was amazed to find out he only has 6 reviews of this book on Goodreads. And maybe I missed something where there's some selected works that's more popular, but I think he's mostly well known for his Tales from Shakespeare, which is kind of like those prose translations of Homer where they just summarize it so children can read it easily. But yeah, this one of his, he is mostly known for his essays, I think, apart from his simplification of Shakespeare with his sister. And I think he's known in like the same tradition as Thomas de Quincey. I think he's known as like one of those essay writers. I also read that 2 of his favorite authors were Robert Burton and Thomas Browne, who are 2 English Renaissance authors known for their excellent prose styles. So if that gives any indication of what his style is like. I think you can find most of his stuff free online, but I just wanted a hardcover copy, like a physical copy, and this one was very cheap, probably because it only has 6 reviews on Goodreads and nobody knows about it, which is bizarre, of course. But yeah, I just opened it up today, started reading the first essay, and I just enjoyed it so much. Yeah, I guess one interesting thing, I also recently watched the movie Tulip Fever, that is about the Dutch Republic whenever people were spending crazy amounts of money on tulips for no reason other than other people were spending obscene amounts of money on tulips. And I had this inspiration to write a story about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I'm not sure if I'd write it, but because I'm not sure if I could pull it off the way I want to, like to do it justice. Because I have a friend that's really into this cryptocurrency stuff, and he spends hours each day looking at it. So he's fairly obsessed, and I would say in a way it's a negative obsession, somewhat in the way that my obsession with books is. But then in the movie Tulip Fever, there's a painter who's painting the portrait of the man and woman who are the two main characters. And when someone comes to the painter's house to see what his work is like, they look at it and say, "Not there. There's no obsession," as if it's derogatory. And I think that's interesting. The possible difference between a positive and negative obsession, or the positive and negative aspects of obsession, because I think going along the same thread, the recent thing with Logan Paul, the vlogger who went to the Aokigahara suicide forest in Japan and found a man who had killed himself, and portrayed it really lightheartedly and was laughing, and got huge backlash. I think he was basically obsessed with what he was doing, and he left the real world. He was living off in his own vlog world, vlogland, where he was separated from reality. And I think that can happen with obsessions with finance, obsessions with fame, obsessions with anything basically, especially obsessions with literature. But I don't think obsessions are always negative. I think they can be very easily, but I wanted to kind of like look at obsession through the lens of some, random young kid who's into cryptocurrencies as a way to make money, but also as a way to exert power into the world. But the thing I don't think I could pull off, writers always fall back on having a character who's like really into literature, or a heavy reader, or more literary, but I don't think someone who's really literary or whatever would get into this stuff. And I don't know anything about pop culture really. I think it would only do it justice if I was able to include conversations with friends, like referencing Rick and Morty and all this stuff that I have literally no idea about. I only know the names and how popular it is. So I don't think I could do it justice, unfortunately. I could get the technical aspects of cryptocurrencies down. I could do all that stuff, but I could get the obsession down perfectly. But I'm not sure if I don't think I found a way to do it justice in representing our time period without having a good knowledge of all these TV shows, a whole bunch of music. Like I would want to include rap music, like Kendrick Lamar or whoever else, references to them, just to do it justice. But I think if I did it now, it would just feel heavy-handed. It would feel like I'm just shoveling in stuff, and I don't want it to be like that. But I'm not sure if I could manage it believably otherwise. So it's still in like the brainstorming phase, but yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I'd like to read it if someone else wrote it, so maybe I'll see what I can do with that. I just have two more books here. I've made a decision with myself that I won't let myself buy a contemporary book without at the same time buying a classic, either a modernist or an actual classic, like from the 1700s, 1600s, because this recent trip to the bookstore, I sold 11 books, and most of them were contemporary books. And as you can see from today, I tried one contemporary book I think he's generally well regarded, this author, Scott McClanahan, but I didn't like it at all. I really didn't enjoy it. I wish I didn't waste my time reading it. And although that is maybe a bit harsh, I loved reading Incel. Even if it wasn't a great book, I just loved it so much more. So, I get ahead of myself with hope by buying these contemporary fiction books, but I just can't do it anymore. If I order a contemporary fiction, I have to order a classic to balance it, because there's such a high chance that it'll be way worse than the classic I order alongside. So alongside these classics that I ordered, I got, you've already seen some classics with the contemporaries, but I also got two more. Bruges, La Mort by Georges Rodenbach. This is a Belgian surrealist novel published in 1892. And the main story is about a guy who, his wife died. And he moves, or I think he at least goes to Bruges. I'm not sure if he moves there. But then he finds a woman who reminds him of his wife, and then becomes obsessed with this new woman. And I also found out this was the first book to use photographs in it. They don't include photographs here, but I thought that was pretty neat. And also, from the time period this was written, this guy was born in 1855, died in 1898. I mean, books from that time period are just so interesting, like the symbolists, the French symbolists, or Russian authors from that time. It's just such a particular feeling to them. It's just very enjoyable. And also, this is a really short read, like 100 pages. So if I just want to have, definite enjoyment, I'll just read that in one night. And then the last book I got to balance out the contemporary fiction is a book by Luigi Pirandello, who is someone I've neglected, considering that he won the Nobel Prize. He's really known for his 6 Characters in Search of an Author. I think NYRB published The Late Mattia Pascal. But the most interesting book to me was his one called Nun and 100,000. I got the old translation by Samuel Putnam. That's what it looks like there. He's also the guy, I read part of a translation of Don Quixote by Samuel Putnam, and I really enjoyed that translation. I prefer that more than the Edith Grossman one. So, yeah, behind the idea behind this book is a guy who, he has a set idea of himself, like anyone does. You see yourself through your own eyes, and you build an identity. But then in the very beginning pages of the book, and then this sort of thing continues, it starts out with his wife noticing that one side of his nose looks different than the other side. And he had always felt like, my nose is pretty, normal. It's symmetrical. My whole face is symmetrical. I'm a normal guy. You wouldn't pick me out in the street if you had to, And she says that one of his, it's not symmetrical. It's sagging down a little. The nostrils a bit larger, and then this totally sets him off on dissociation or depersonalization, where he starts analyzing his life and realizing parts of his personality that he thought were correct, but then eventually ended up being, they could be false, to where how people view him is completely different than how he views himself or how other people view him. And he starts having a crisis of identity in this book, and I thought that idea sounded really neat. And I think the guy started planning it, Luigi Pirandello, started planning it in 1909, and he's an Italian author, and I don't think I've read an Italian author from that far back. I've read Pavese quite a lot, but yeah, other than a little bit of Marinetti, but I don't think he really counts. And I haven't read Svevo yet, which I need to get to. But yeah, so yeah, those are all the books I got with those are my self-presents from Christmas. If you've read any of these and you think they're really good, let me know. I may push it up on the list of to-read books. If you haven't, some of these are pretty interesting. And if you have any to recommend, let me know. Yep, I think that's all I had. Yep. Thanks for watching. Death is a Gang Boss.